What is up, guys, and welcome to the Thok Normal Mode Raid Guide. As always, the abilities will be scrolling above my head, so if you want to take a look at those, go ahead and pause the video, feel free, or open your dungeon journal and take a look at those while you're watching. The biggest things that you need to know about this fight is this is a two-phase fight with a few extra twists. This fight is actually probably my favorite fight in all of Siege of Orgrimmar. I love everything about this fight. And let's get into phase 1 right now so I can kind of explain to you why. So this fight has a great healer check, a great tank check, and a great DPS check. And I'm going to explain all of those to you right now. The first thing that you need to understand, though, is in phase 1, you pretty much want to burn him as hard as you can. You want to stack up as much as you can. And the reason you want to do that is because what's going to happen is he's just going to keep casting Deafening Screech, and it's going to do more and more damage, and it's going to come quicker and quicker and quicker. So what you're doing is you're lusting on the pull, you're going in, you're popping cooldowns, you're trying to burn as much life as you can, and you're trying to stay in these phases as long as possible. So what you're going to do in order to stay in this phase as long as possible is you're going to start cycling healing cooldowns. You're going to be using personal cooldowns as soon as they're up, health stones, whatever you've got to try to stay in this phase as long as you can. Now, how do you stay in this phase? What happens is if a player drops below 50% health, they gain a debuff called Bloodied. Now, what happens is when more than when more than a certain percentage of your raid, depending on what version of the raid you're doing, when more than a certain percentage of your raid has this debuff and they're stacked within 10 yards, you will then transition into phase 2. So what you want to do is you want to try to drag these phases out as long as possible, because it's not really about the enrage timer, it's about trying to extend these phases as long as you can so you have more time to DPS the boss. So what you're going to do is you're going to DPS him and cycle through your cooldowns, live as long as you possibly can. What's going to happen next is once you do have enough players to where you turn to where Thok becomes Blood Frenzied, because enough players have the Bloody debuff, then you're going to transition to phase 2. Now, in phase 2, what happens? In phase 2, he then begins his fixate phase. Now, what's going to happen here is he will fixate on a random raider. You need to have your group stacked up away from him and then just have the raider run down the hall or down to the other end. You kind of just do him north and south, back and forth. The trick is after his fixate cast expires, if he doesn't eat you, which is the goal, so that's why you're running, if he doesn't eat you, he then gains a stack, and every stack he runs faster and faster and faster, and you want to push this phase again as long as you can. So now you're asking, well, how do I end this phase? Well, there will also be a jailer that comes out during each of these phases. What you want to do is have your melee burn down that jailer, and then your tank will have a key. Now your tank can then use this key to open up one of 3 doors, and depending on which jailer your group wants to open first, depends on what little quirks you'll have going back into phase 1, but it's just rinse and repeat those 2 phases. So in phase 1 you're stacked up, you're trying to keep as many people out of Bloodied as possible, and then you're going back into phase 2 transition, you're cutting the boss back and forth across the room while not running in front of him, and you're pretty much cycling those 2 phases. The only other main abilities that the boss has before we get into the jailers is obviously if you stand in front of him, that's the tank's job. If you stand behind him, you're going to get tail swiped, so don't do that. So you're pretty much all stacking on the side of the boss. That's also key to remember as well. So let's go into the jailers and see what they kind of throw back into phase 1. So every time the Thok eats a jailer, or every time you kill a jailer and you free a prisoner, Thok will eat that prisoner. That's how you end the Bloody or the fixate phase and go back to phase 1. So you have 3 different ones that you can get. For all intents and purposes, they all have a tank swap mechanic. So this is why you're bringing 2 tanks. One will do an icy tomb thing where if you get 5 stacks, your tank will be frozen, and obviously you can't tank anymore. There's another one where he puts on a poison debuff, and there's another one, pretty much there's a tank swap in every fight. Okay, after you kill or after he eats every prisoner. The trick is what does he do to the raid? Now for the frost guy, or the frost guy is probably the best way to say it. Your raid will randomly get RNG stacks on them. Now, if any of your raid members hit 5 stacks while in phase 1, what's going to happen is they're going to be turned into an ice block. Now, you can break them out of ice blocks. Think Syndragosa 2.0 when it comes to these ice blocks. Just target them, burn them down, GG, get back in, and keep going. So watch the RNG on your stacks there. You cannot dispel these. In the poison guy's phase, he does have a dispellable dot that needs to be dispelled. It can be mass dispelled, so keep that in mind as well. And the longer this phase goes, the more and more dispels, and the quicker the dispels as well as more damage. So you're going to want to try to be cycling dispels as well as your healing cooldowns, making this fight extremely healer intensive during phase 1s and DPS intensive obviously during the rest of the phases. And then obviously the last guy that you probably should kill is the War Master, and this is the fire guy. Okay, so once you're in phase 1 again, he will put fire on the ground. And remember, you have to be stacked up in order to convert him into bloodied. So even if you have players below 50% health and you have enough players with the bloodied debuff, if they're not stacked up, he won't phase transition and he'll just wipe your raid. So you will see a bunch of fire spawning on the ground. So you want to move as a group away from that and then have a central location when you're ready to push him into the last phase 2, or the last fixate phase, because at this point this is your soften rage, because after a certain amount of time he will just start eating your raid members and running back and forth across the room as fast as possible. So this is your berserk timer in essence. But if you can do all those things, guys, you can kill this fight. Hope you enjoyed this one, and as always, see you in the next one.